This is the Future of Device Management podcast, brought to you by Fleet. I'm your host, Zach Wasserman, CTO and co-founder of Fleet. Now, let's jump right into today's episode. Welcome to the show, and we're here today with Jesse Peterson, Client Platform Engineer at Meta, formerly Facebook. Jesse, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This will be fun.
So, Jesse, folks may know you from your work on MicroMDM and NanoMDM, some really cool open source macOS MDM servers. But maybe you can just fill in everyone on kind of what's your story? How did you get into client platform engineering, and how did you end up where you are today?
Sure, yeah. So not long after high school, actually, I went to work for a small IT consultancy in Seattle called MacTex. And so we were essentially Mac IT support for small businesses and large businesses of kind of all sizes, really. So that ranged from sort of normal everyday help desk support all the way up to, network engineering, both the entirety of support for some smaller companies, as well as kind of embedded specialists for and consultants for large organizations. And so that's where the background in my Mac IT /CPE stuff came from. And that company, MacTex, actually has they still play a role in open source MDM, as we might talk about a little later.
Oh, awesome! That's cool. And you've now been at Facebook Meta for some years now. So how did you end up kind of going from this small, maybe call it boutique consulting kind of operation up into what I imagine must be one of the larger macOS deployments on the planet?
Yeah. So there's the MacAdmin community is larger every day, but through conferences and online communication, and way back in the day there was the OS X server mailing list, which turned into the had connections to the IRC channel, and now the Slack. So anyway, there's this community of folks that we all kind of know each other and have long known each other through some of our open source contributions and just general social presence at conferences and things like that. So I had known Mike Dodge, who you might know, from and Nate Walk and a few others in the community from Facebook, just through those social aspects, and they kind of sent me a request to be interviewed some 5 years ago. Actually, I'm coming up on my 5 years here real soon, a few months.
Wow, congrats!
Yeah, and so really, it was the MacAdmin community, I think, that spurred that on.
That's so cool. And we were just talking before we started the recording about how awesome these communities are, and I just love to hear about how the community has led to career development for folks. And I have fond memories of Mike Dodge as a fresh software engineer at Facebook. I used to see him riding around on his electric skateboard, and he hooked me up with a ride on that, which was really exciting for me at the time.
Yeah. Mike's amazing. Love Mike.
Yeah, and Nate also really great folks. So cool that the community brought you in there. So Jesse, what does your day-to-day look like now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Sometimes I can't remember. I don't remember what I did yesterday. But yeah, so I guess it's with a lot of the open source work, and especially with the NanoMDM work, and very recently the NanoDEP work, it's kind of split a little bit between some of those contributions to open source and of course the more day-to-day CPE stuff. So it depends. When there's a project heavy thing for the open source stuff, I'll work on literal coding for tools like MicroMDM and the lot. And then some days we're looking at the certificate workflow for how we get our authorization certificates onto clients, or security controls, or any number of things that have to do with a normal CPE fleet. Yeah.
Cool. And so going back to MDM, which we mentioned before, and for those listening who might not be familiar, MDM, mobile device management, is kind of a protocol for managing Mac OS and iOS devices. And so, Jesse, I learned that you open sourced your first Mac OS MDM back in 2015. So it's been a while now, and I'd love to understand more about kind of what was the motivation and what got you excited about doing MDM in an open source way.
Yeah, so going back to that IT consultancy that I worked for, MacTex, we at the time we didn't have too much MDM involvement, but when you read the Apple tea leaves, it's kind of clear that this is the direction that you have to go if you're going to be managing Apple devices. Apple has this our way or the highway kind of attitude towards a lot of things, not just the IT management stuff, but developer relations, APIs, etc. You do it Apple's way, or you will be left behind. So it was kind of seeing that writing on the wall, but being a little bit dissatisfied with the commercial offerings, and also just kind of geeky curiosity. I wanted to learn more about how MDM works, and why can't we do things a little bit differently, right? A lot of at the time, a lot of the commercial MDMs didn't even have APIs, right? You just use them through pointy clicky UIs, which is great, but for someone like Facebook or other organizations, we like to see our changes in source control, and diffs and line changes and the attributions of committers, and right, so you can go look at history and stuff like that. And workflows based around that didn't really exist for a commercial MDM, and so doing things a little bit differently was definitely part of the motivation there. Just kind of geeky curiosity. How does this thing work? At the time, the Apple MDM protocol was behind the developer account, the enterprise developer account system that Apple has, which is like $300 a year premium that you pay to get into the enterprise account. So on top of being curious, it kind of had this allure of like the secrecy, right? So it was a little bit like, okay, maybe, can we open source part of this? A little bit of rebellion, right? Of this, gatekeepered, so to speak, protocol. Yeah, so lots of motivations there on doing MDM differently, and then of course naturally open sourcing it for the community.
Yeah,
those are some of the motivations.
That's cool. I like that there is, partly a motivation of curiosity, and partly you had a need that was completely unserviced by the existing commercial solutions at that time. So I can really see how being able to build it yourself to the requirements that you had was a huge value add.
Yeah, definitely. Working for as you call it, boutique consultancy, a lot of our clients were pretty small, and so budgets aren't exactly great. And so to bring on an MDM could have, at the time with the options, there were much cheaper MDM alternatives later in the day. But at the time, the cost per device of an MDM solution is a pretty big hit. So the cost savings of open source was also a consideration as well.
Nice. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so in 2015, you open sourced your first MDM, but that wasn't MicroMDM or NanoMDM. So how did you end up getting involved with Victor and the MicroMDM project?
Yeah, exactly. The first one was called Commandment, and it was written in Python. But yeah, so that project got donated to the community, I guess you could say. There's a fellow in the MacAdmin community, kind of a mystery person. His name's Mosen, and he has sort of a reputation for taking on these really crazy projects that take a lot of work, and he'll just churn them out of nowhere. During my transition of working from Commandment to MicroMDM, kind of handed that project off, and he did amazing work and made it Python 3 compatible and integrated the cryptography into native Python libraries, whereas mine were hacky contributions over OpenSSL. Yeah, so that was nice that got to see a little development even after I had stopped working on it. But to answer your question, what brought me to MicroMDM was a couple of things. One is I think it had a little bit more support going behind it, whereas I was just contributing code. I think Victor was doing the bigger job of sort of evangelizing and writing documentation and sort of the stuff that isn't code that really makes an open source project successful. And so through that, Victor sort of turned me on to the Go language, which I like a lot these days. And of course, MicroMDM is written in Go. And so the combination of getting to learn a new language and contributing to an open source MDM kind of, I switched sides, I guess.
Nice. And then the evolution continues from MicroMDM to NanoMDM. So you wrote a great blog post, and we'll try to link that in the show notes, about why NanoMDM, but maybe you could give a little bit of an understanding to folks of, why NanoMDM.
Yeah, so as I wrote about, MicroMDM has served us very well through even our very large fleet. But it did start to have some scalability issues related to the storage backend. So one of the goals of the open source MicroMDM project was to be kind of a good profile manager replacement. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with profile manager, but this is the MDM solution that is sort of the reference implementation of MDM, if you could call it that Apple bundled with the server application. So you'd have a Mac, and you'd go to the App Store and install the server.app, and it would come with this thing called Profile Manager. And it was kind of a heap of, I guess you could call it. It was this weird combination of PHP and Ruby and native code compiled in. It was just, and it didn't scale at all and had very interesting issues. Anyway, they've discontinued it. And so, but what was nice about it is it had a nice UI, and it was kind of the free option, right? So if you want to do MDM for free, you do Profile Manager. And so one of the visions for MicroMDM was to kind of be the better alternative of Profile Manager, right? So bring free, open source, and easy to use MDM to everyone, right? Schools, folks. A lot of times in schools and smaller organizations, someone who's not IT ends up doing IT, and so bringing an MDM solution to those types of folks was always kind of one of the goals of MicroMDM. I don't think we quite made it there, partly because there wasn't enough. There hasn't been enough development on the UX and UI. But to go back to your original question, part of the reasoning behind that was we integrated a database solution into MicroMDM called BoltDB. And so this is completely contained within Go, the single binary. You just download the binary. You don't have to worry about setting up an SQL server. You don't have to worry about any of those dependencies. You start the server, it works, it runs, which has been great and scaled for us great up until it didn't. So we needed to scale MicroMDM, and our options were, well, we could build in like a SQL backend to MicroMDM, and in fact, someone had already done that. There's a large PR for MicroMDM that's 7,000 plus lines of code in a single PR, which none of us had time to code review, unfortunately. And that's really unfortunate that a contribution like that was done, but we just didn't have the time to merge it in and make sure it worked. And importantly, with open source, the non-code things, be able to support that. I think people are using that fork of MicroMDM that talks to SQL servers. So we couldn't do that. We didn't integrate that back end, and so I made the decision to kind of start playing around with the MDM low-level protocol stuff, and kind of thought, well, let's decompose this, and how simple could this be? MicroMDM has some very interesting abstractions and a message bus queue and some fun things that would have been really cool in like a microservice environment. But in order to solve the scalability, I decided to break down the MDM protocol and go even simpler. And so out of playing with the MDM protocol, some tools and stuff, put together enough of a functional set of tools and code that NanoMDM kind of popped out the other side of that. So that's the long story.
Yeah, and the MDM protocol, I mean, I've been learning about it myself recently. From what I can tell, besides for some fairly complex dances during the enrollment time, the MDM protocol ultimately just has a set of commands that you can push down to the devices that are managed, and they'll execute those commands and return the results. So I guess it sounds like with NanoMDM, you were thinking, how can we strip this down to sort of the bare minimum that needed to be done for that? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I'll preface what you said with the way MDM protocol v1 works is yes. The device pops. So there's a command queue for each device, and you enqueue a command onto the command stack, and then when the device checks in, it pops off the next command off the command stack there. So you're right.
So
Conceptually, it's very simple, and NanoMDM does the bare minimum to support that.
So then it sounds like maybe you're hinting at declarative management, which is the future, we believe.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So maybe you can give us a quick summary of what is declarative management and how is that different?
Sure, yeah. So the MDM v1 protocol has been around for, 10 years or something like that. Long time. And a few years ago, we heard rumblings that Apple was kind of thinking of changing the paradigm of what the low-level MDM protocol looks like. And then last year at WWDC, so this would be 2021, Apple announced their declarative management, which was on iOS only. So this is a change in the fundamental protocol level. And if you think about it, it's basically changing from the MDM v1 protocol is very imperative, right? You send commands to devices that do stuff. And your MDM does that sort of in the moment, right? And then declarative management is just that. It changes the paradigm to be declarative. And what we learned about this WWDC, which is actually kind of exciting, is much more state controlled on the client device. So you set up these declarations that do things, and then you can set up conditionals in the same set of declarations that allow the client to make more decisions about what and how it should be managed. Is the short of it. But Apple has a great couple of talks that they have at WWDC. They're great to just kind of get an idea and wrap your head around what the declarative is.
Awesome. Thanks for filling us in on that. And Jesse, I've noticed that MicroMDM and now NanoMDM are kind of an ecosystem in that there's the GitHub organization, the MicroMDM GitHub organization, and there's a number of repos living under those that provide the various different components that are necessary for doing this these MDM activities on Mac OS. So I'm curious, what kind of goals do you have for this ecosystem of NanoMDM and MicroMDM, and where do you see it heading over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so that ecosystem and the GitHub organization, credit for all that definitely goes to Victor, also known as Groob, in various social medias. But definitely a plan to keep that up. One of the more popular sub packages of that organization is the SCEP project for certificates, and in fact, MicroMDM integrates that project to provide device identity certificates for MDM. But also, it's its own independent SCEP server, and was recently picked up by a Debian package manager, which was kind of fun. So other folks are finding components of our work useful and interesting outside the context of MDM, which is really cool, which is really kind of the goal with this open source stuff, right? Sure, it's useful to you, but if other people can pick up and have it be useful, and especially contribute back, that's just great for everyone. But as far as the organization goes and where to go, kind of, I in that blog post you mentioned, in consideration with NanoMDM, MicroMDM v2 is in my mind. And while I don't have, I can't speak to exactly where it's going because I don't know yet. I haven't worked it all out in my head or talked to enough people to develop that plan. The idea was that NanoMDM would plug into that, right? So NanoMDM is a very core. It just handles the core Apple MDM protocol. Someday, when MicroMDM v2 starts getting built out, would like to use NanoMDM as the protocol handler for MicroMDM v2, just for the core Apple MDM protocol. It's a fun wordplay, but MicroMDM contains more things than NanoMDM, so NanoMDM would just be a component of MicroMDM. So I guess some of the longer term goals are to come back to those ideas of providing a free and open source MDM solution to people who may not be quite as technical. And I think that's where MicroMDM v2 might head someday when we all have time to, write code for this stuff. So that's definitely on the horizon. Well, at least in the plans. I'd really like to do that.
And so working on NanoMDM, it sounds like, is part of your day job these days. Is that MicroMDM v2 sort of a passion project? The idea of bringing MDM capabilities to folks who are, lower budget and less technical?
I think so. Yeah, we're doing useful things with NanoMDM, and as you know, Facebook has a lot of its own infrastructure already that we can leverage. So we don't have to do as much of the work that, say, another organization would have to do by picking up NanoMDM, right? So because NanoMDM is such a low layer technology, out of necessity, you have to layer things on top of it to make it do useful things, like actually manage a device, actually sending profiles. You have to have integrations for that stuff. It's happy to support the protocol layer to enroll a device, but beyond that, if you want to make the device do things, you have to write those integrations. And so at Meta, at Facebook, we have a whole big stack and a whole bunch of helping technologies and stuff, which unfortunately we can't really open source, both for the case of, there's proprietary stuff in there, but also our stack is so unique to ourselves, it wouldn't really be useful to other folks to release this stuff, right? It would just be little tiny chunks that rely on other bigger pieces of the Facebook infrastructure. So yes, I think you're right. It is a passion project to bring to bring some of those lofty goals to smaller organizations that maybe can't go forward with more traditional commercial MDM vendors.
Well, it sounds like those folks will be really grateful, and certainly a lot of folks already are really grateful for the work that you and Victor have done to bring these tools out into the public.
Yeah. Victor wrote about this a few years ago. One of the best things about MicroMDM really is the community and the open source stuff. I don't think I would derive as much happiness doing it if it wasn't open source. It gives me a lot of personal fulfillment and to contribute to this, especially back to the communities that have helped me so much, right? Like we started with, that community has definitely given me opportunities, like we're even working at Meta. And so I hope to contribute back to that same community that gave me so much.
Totally, and that's something that I really relate with as well, and something that we had also talked about separate from this conversation was the idea that having community and doing open source allows projects to kind of outlive their usefulness within the organization where they originate, but during that time, maybe even if things have kind of slowed down there, they get to expand into so many other organizations and really see a continual level of growth in value. And I think for some of us engineers, there's like just a real joy in seeing that value continuing to increase. And whether it's helping people get their jobs done more effectively or whatever it is that's bringing.
Absolutely, yeah. The open source, yeah, you're exactly right. The idea that once you get it into the open source world, and I guess we talked about this a little bit, having it continue on and get contributions from others and be useful even in contexts where you couldn't even imagine. It's like, oh wow, someone's using it for that. That's really interesting. Is pretty rewarding, and definitely a net positive for the world.
Awesome, totally. And so we've spent a lot of time today focusing on MDM, but I wonder, for you as a pretty experienced client platform engineer and experienced Mac IT person, what are the other things that you would recommend for CPE teams and IT admins to be focusing on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can give the trite answers, like security. So security is an obvious one. Perhaps it's this day and age with ransomware and all that. It's really crucial. We were just talking about ransomware at the office hours, MicroMDM, just before this call. I don't know if I can speak too clearly to security. There's a few places that I would focus on as far as that goes. I think there's a recent effort to verify the chains of trust in kind of all things. So where exactly does your software come from? Who's providing that? Are these things signed? The chain of trust, I think, is important, and that for our organization, that goes into things like certificate issuance, which kind of makes me glad that Apple's taking steps to expose some of their device attestation stuff. So getting confidence that your devices are the devices that they're supposed to be, so that you can trust that they're in the hands of the people that they're supposed to be. Those are focuses that we're both working on, but also I think are pretty interesting and places where I'd like to see more development. So security is one, but there's kind of something that's important to me as well, which is which I don't know gets enough focus, which is user experience. And naturally, being in the Apple world, this is a prime thing for Apple products, right? They care a lot about that. But I think it's good to have our tooling and our tools get out of the way of the user, right? The whole reason why we're here is to make sure that people can do their jobs effectively and securely and stuff like that. So I think getting out of the way of the user and having good user experiences while managing all of the various things that we have to manage from a security or compliance standpoint or what have you. That's just something that's kind of close to my heart, to make sure that the user experience of users are as unimpeded as they can be.
Totally. I mean, those both sound like really excellent things to focus on and great attitudes to bring to your organization and the users that you serve.
Yep. Unfortunately, they're at either side, right? So on the one hand, you've got security, and then on the very other hand, you've got user experience. And sometimes it's like a slider bar. The further you go in one direction, you take away from the other. So.
Yeah, and I think that finding that balance and finding ways that we can bring those things actually closer together is going to be one of the most important challenges of both IT and security teams in the 21st century.
Agreed. Yeah. Things like WebAuthn and getting rid of passwords are all steps in that direction. It's all great stuff.
So it can be done. There's hope that we can sort of coalesce these things.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, it's been so fun to speak with you today. And, love all of the mentions of community and connecting with folks. So in the spirit of that, where can folks find you? Are you going to be at any conferences coming up you'd like to connect on socials? Or what's the best way for folks to get in touch?
Sure. So I'm pretty reliably available at the MacAdmins Slack, which is just macadmins.org. You can come join. I'm Jesse Peterson on there. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn and a few other places if you'd like. But if you want to chat, that's probably where to go these days. Once things get back to normal again, I definitely anticipate going to more conferences. Was definitely a huge fan of conferences. The hallway track is really important. I think so. I used to do those a lot before the pandemic. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, thank you so much, and thanks, folks, for listening. This has been a really exciting conversation for me, and thank you again for all of the work that you have done to serve the community of MacAdmins who want and need MDM solutions to help keep their users working and keep their users safe.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great, and like I said before, contributing to these open source projects is pretty fulfilling. So I'm more than happy.
All right, and that's all for now, folks.